Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be taking our first step into the world of Spawn miniseries with Violator number 1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in May of 1994, the Violator miniseries, and really Spawn miniseries in general, pose an interesting challenge for me because I do a monthly look at Spawn, I have to try and get the miniseries viewed in roughly about the same time as they would exist within the Spawn story canonically. Though the Violator miniseries itself does not specifically state exactly where it falls in the Spawn story, but it is around where we're at now in the story in terms of, just kind of existing in the relative same time period as where the story is currently at, if that makes any sense. We can see here on the front cover, we have Violator in his clown form. He is still unable to revert back into his demon form and use his demon powers. Then underneath, we have some other demons, several of which we have not seen before. And we have a bunch of guns pointing at Violator and the silhouette of this person in the background, who is someone we will get to know very shortly. Story: Alan Moore. Pencils: Bart Sears. Inks: Mark Pennington. Letterer: Tom Orzechowski. Color: Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. To get started with, Alan Moore being the author of the Violator miniseries is somewhat of a continuation of the world building that he did in issue number 8 of Spawn. If you haven't watched my video on issue number 8 of Spawn, I suggest you do so, as this kind of continues to flesh out the principles of how the afterlife and the 8th sphere of hell kind of work in the Spawn universe. We see here on the first page, there is a large pool of blood on the floor with a image of the earth inside of it. And this is where the demons of the 8th sphere of hell can use blood as basically a viewing window into other realms, in this case, the realm of the living. These demons are the brothers of the Violator, or I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it, the Flabiac brothers or the Flabaic brothers. Todd didn't really give any kind of a pronunciation key in terms of how that's supposed to be said, so I'm just going to go with Flabiac. They're trying to hunt down the Violator because they are upset that due to his banishment to Earth and being stuck in human form, they believe that he is a disgrace to their family name and that they have to punish him for this. They're using this blood portal of sorts to basically zero in on his location so that they can go and take care of him as it zooms in closer and closer to the point where it can be seen that he is being carried to the end of a dock by some mobsters. As we then are teleported to Earth, we see the Violator being carried by a group of mafia goons led by one Tony Twistelli, and he has cement around his feet. Of course, they're going to dump him into the harbor and drown him. Of course, Twistelli's business assistant or personal assistant, I should say, is having a hard time as he's not really hired muscle. And Tony is kind of ribbing him, saying he's not sure why he keeps him around, and then tells his 3 goons to dispatch with Violator by throwing him off the dock after he has left because he has a reputation to uphold, which I find a little odd that he's ordering the execution of somebody but doesn't want to be around when it happens. I guess plausible deniability. We then see that the Violator is starting to slowly unbind his hands, and as the goons are about to throw him into New York Harbor, he states that one of them has a nice tie as he lunges forward in his only chance to free himself and grabs the man's tie with his teeth. Now, it is stated that the mafia was able to find out who Violator was because of security camera footage in the buildings when he was going around executing the different mafia bosses, eating their hearts as his demon form Violator, but then also reverted into his human clown form, which is how they were able to put two and two together. And apparently he also just confessed to killing all of those mafia bosses willingly, and that's kind of how he wound up where he's at now. We then see as Violator is thrown off the end of the dock, he continues to hold on to the other goon's tie with his teeth, pulling him into the water with him as they start to sink very quickly. At this point, Violator is able to free his hands as he lets go of the goon's tie, reaches into his jacket, pulls out his own gun, then shoves it into his face, right into his mouth, and pulls the trigger. I should also point out that apparently when Mabalja banished Violator to Earth and locked him in his human form, he also took away Violator's powers, but more importantly, his immortality, meaning that Violator can now be killed by any normal means that any other human can be killed by. As Violator continues to quickly sink into the depths, he wastes no time in aiming the gun at the cement around his feet, firing one time, cracking it, and then firing a second time to break it in half. He then grabs back onto the tie with his teeth and begins to swim towards the surface. For those of you wondering, firearms will technically work underwater so long as the powder within the cartridges doesn't get wet and the ignition can still happen. However, firing a bullet through water does severely limit its capabilities as the water provides so much more resistance and also the cooling property of the bullet coming out of the gun. However, in this instance, with him basically firing point blank on every shot, it shouldn't cause any problems. And I'm actually kind of surprised at the fact that I don't know if Alan Moore took this into consideration or if Bart Sears took this into consideration when they were drawing this book, but it actually stays within the realm of plausibility. Then on the beach, we see the other two mafia goons looking for their friend, trying to figure out if he washed up on shore. They can't find him because it's so dark. However, they then hear a voice calling to them that he's over here on the shore. When they approach, they mention that he looks awful, and he states that he feels bad, and it's because of the large hole in the back of his head. The one goon closest to him asks him how big the hole is, to which he states pretty big, as we see Violator's entire hand, still holding the gun, burst through his mouth and aim the gun directly at one of the other goons. On the next page, we get this really cool sequence of panels that are all from the perspective of the third goon that's further back from the Violator, as he witnesses his associate get shot through the head. He completely starts to freak out, firing blindly. However, Violator uses the first goon that he killed as a human shield, holding him in front of the other guy until he runs out of bullets, and then points the gun at him, stating that while he may no longer be in his demon form, he is very reluctant to be killed, and it's because as a demon, he knows where he will go if he is killed, and then says say goodnight and pulls the trigger, finally killing the last goon. Also, another point I'd like to make is that the Violator in total has only fired the revolver that he's carrying, or I should say stole from the first goon, 5 times, which means even if this is only a 5-shot revolver, which it may be a 6-shot, it's still, working out on the math. I'd like to pay a little bit of respect to the writers and the illustrators, making a point to still keep this within some bounds of reality, despite the fact that we're also talking about, crazy demons from hell in a world with superheroes and all sorts of other impossible things, whatever. But it's still fun. We then are teleported back to the 8th sphere of hell as the brothers have witnessed Violator doing all this and are surprised that he's still acting very much like his demon self, even though he's stuck in human form, as we can see a corpse here with all of its blood being drained out so that they can continue to watch this. However, the blood is coagulating now and is making it hard for them to see the image, so they need more blood, at which point one of them reaches into a cage filled with apparently damned souls, grabs one of them out, and splits them open to pour more blood into the pool so that they can get a clear picture. This also brings up an interesting question in that, being that all of the people in the 8th sphere of hell are already dead, what exactly happens to them when they're quote-unquote killed in this sphere, considering these aren't their physical bodies? They should essentially be their souls, or if their souls are reborn into new bodies, as what it kind of looked like in Spawn number 8. I don't know. There's a lot of questions here that aren't really fully fleshed out, and I kind of wish that a little bit more was explained on that front. However, this miniseries takes more a role of a dark comedy, so it doesn't go into a lot of depth in terms of answering those kinds of questions. We then are given another couple of pages of first-person perspective panels as we are teleported to the office of one Mr. Tony Twistelli, who is now having to once again deal with trying to hunt down the Violator and kill him for his transgressions. He has decided to bring in another hired gun as his men were not up to the task. This time making a point that he wants to hire a full-blooded human, as he is still disappointed in the poor results of Overt Kill, who was destroyed by Spawn in issue number 7. If you'd like to know more about Overt Kill and his appearances in trying to take out Spawn, check out my videos on Spawn number 6 and 7 for that story. The man approaches the desk stating that his name is the Admonisher, who is, this is his first appearance as far as I know, and he was also the silhouette that we saw on the front cover of this issue. He asks who it is that Tony wants him to take out. Tony starts to speak, saying, "You see Jake and Larry here," and without even a moment's hesitation, the Admonisher pulls out 2 guns and kills both Jake and Larry. However, Tony then tells him that he was actually just wanting them to go bring in a television so that they could show images to the Admonisher. He apologizes for his mistake, but Tony says that, it's a rough line of work and those guys weren't exactly pulling their weight anyway. So his assistant goes and grabs the TV to bring it in and allow them to give visuals to the Admonisher for the task that he will have at hand. We then see Admonisher standing in front of the television as he sees an image of the Violator in his demon form. But then Tony explains to him that currently he is in the form of Clown. Admonisher doesn't seem to be at all worried about this, as he states he's going to just, go out and ice him. However, Tony tells him to be very careful and to not rush in blindly, as the Violator has already amassed a large pile of bodies in his wake, and that he's also managed to take out 3 of Tony's best guys. However, Admonisher isn't really too worried about it still, so Tony tells him that he needs to approach it in more of a Teddy Roosevelt style, stating that he needs to walk softly and carry a big stick. Admonisher states that sounds like a good plan, but he wonders if he needs to kill Teddy Roosevelt, and Tony then has to explain to the Admonisher, who appears to not be the brightest fellow, that Teddy Roosevelt has been dead for quite some time, as Admonisher just kind of laughs it off. Meanwhile, back in the 8th sphere of hell, the Flabiac or Flebiak brothers are still watching the movements of the Violator through a pool of blood, as we see he is now marching forward with the head of the goon he first killed still on his arm. However, they can't see anything in the background as their reflections are starting to be shown in the blood, because this corpse is now empty, so they need to get a fresh one to revitalize the pool. As they off another one of the condemned humans in hell and replenish the blood pool, the picture becomes clear again, and they realize that Violator seems to be in a shopping center, as we are then teleported back to Earth, and Violator, thinking to himself about how he had gone to a mall, thinking there would be a hardware store there so he could get a hacksaw and use it to cut the goon off of his arm, as rigor mortis is sent in, and he now can't get this guy's head off of his wrist anymore. However, upon seeing a clown walk in with a gun and a dead body hanging off of his arm, they made the decision to call the police, which meant that Violator only had time to saw through his neck and is now still stuck with this guy's head on his arm. He's trying to figure out what his next move should be, as he knows the cops are on their way. However, he is cut off when he is attacked from behind by the Admonisher, who was very quickly able to find Violator's whereabouts by listening to police bands. We also see he is completely strapped to the gills with just ridiculous amounts of weapons, as this is where the book's comedic elements start to really come into their own. Violator is completely caught off guard. We also see the head on his arm seems to also be looking at the Admonisher in surprise, even though it's dead. Like I said, this is where the comedy elements of this book really start to move to the forefront. Violator is looking upward as the Admonisher tells him that he's going to give him a darn good telling off. Apparently that's the way that he categorizes what he does in his offing of people, which again, just kind of going into the weird psychotic state in which the Admonisher seems to live his day-to-day. We are then treated to this wonderful 4-panel, 2-page spread, and I've really got to give a lot of props to Bart Sears for the way that he laid out these 2 pages, because this is a really cool idea. We see Admonisher landing on top of Clown, grabbing him by the hair and head. Violator tries to talk his way out of it. However, he's cut off completely when he and the Admonisher fly over the railing and into the fountain of the mall, as Violator loses his gun, which hits this poor mall goer in the head. And then Violator jumps out of the fountain and tries to make a quick escape. Now, the reason I like these 2 pages is that the background is just one shot behind them that is, basically all kind of, one static image. However, we see here in the division of the 4 panels that the movement of the Admonisher and the Violator is happening throughout each one of these panels, despite the fact that the background isn't really moving at the same pace. We see that, this mall goer is cut between both panels, but is in the same place in both of those panels. Same with this guy here, and it happens in a few other places. This is such a creative way to draw an action sequence, and I really, really like it. Like I said, Bart Sears did a real bang-up job with these 2 pages. And what do you know? Bart decided that it was such a cool idea that he was going to use it for this sequence as well, where we see Violator trying to run up an escalator to escape the Admonisher. However, the Admonisher just leaps from the bottom of the escalator, does a backflip, and lands at the top of the escalator. We see the Violator is making his way up the escalator on foot through the panels. Now, in this shot, or on these 2 pages, it should be noted that despite the escalator being one continuous image through all 4 of the panels, that some of the mall goers are in motion throughout the panels. For instance, this man in the red shirt is turned in a different position. However, this man with the brown coat is in the same position in 2 panels, while this man in the yellow shirt, who is completely disgusted by the decapitated head that is on Violator's arm and is losing his lunch as a result, is in 2 different positions between the panels. again, this is such a cool idea. We also see early on the Violator knocking a child off the escalator and this man reaching his arms out to catch said child. Uh, but again, I really like the way that this is done in terms of creating an action sequence that exists in one particular shot, but showing each portion of the sequence throughout that one particular shot. It's such a unique idea, and I don't know that I've necessarily seen anyone else do this kind of stuff in other books. But again, hats off to Bart Sears. Meanwhile, back in the 8th sphere of hell, the Brothers of the Violator are trying to determine what they should do in terms of the situation at hand. We see one of them state that he believes that they should kill Violator themselves so that their reputation is not ruined if he is killed by the Admonisher. However, one of the other brothers states that, Violator's not all bad. He's a really good brother and maybe they should help him out. Then a third brother states that they're both making good points and that they should split a dipstick to decide. Dipstick being what they refer to the condemned humans as. So we see one of them reach in, grab one of the other humans, and say that they're going to go heads or tails. As he releases the said human, the other two brothers pull from both ends and split the poor soul in half, and apparently it turned up heads, though it's not explained exactly how they made that determination. So they're going to go after the Violator themselves. Meanwhile, back on Earth in the mall at the top of the escalator, we see the Admonisher aiming his bow with what is presumed to be some sort of explosive tip on the end directly at the Violator, who has now started to try and run against the flow of traffic back down the escalator and, just trying to push past people. The Admonisher still talking in weird gibberish, saying that he's going to give him a good old-fashioned tongue lashing, which is apparently code for "I'm going to kill you with an explosive tipped arrow." As we see, the guy in the yellow shirt is still vomiting all over himself, and it is just pure chaos in the mall as Violator is running for his life. Violator is able to dodge the shot of the Admonisher. However, no one else on the escalator was so fortunate, as the explosion is just killing a large crowd of people as we see bodies and body parts flying as he continues to run, trying to figure out what he's going to do, as he is very much afraid of being killed, considering he's no longer immortal. However, he then realizes that the mall around him is starting to transform, which is being illustrated once again beautifully in one of the cool 4-panel shots that we've seen earlier in the book. He looks around, seeing that the floor is bubbling, and realizes that there's a very familiar smell in the air, which surprises him as he realizes that the things going on around him should only be happening when there's a large contingency of Hellborn in the area. However, he believes he is the only Hellborn in the area at the moment, and also, being that he no longer has any powers, is very confused why any of this would be happening until he hears a familiar voice call to him from behind and realizes that he's also got other issues to deal with besides just being chased by the Admonisher. And on the final page of the story, he turns around to see that his brothers are now on Earth and that they seem to not be too happy with him, as we realize that the next issue is where the story will continue. Now, all 4 of the brothers are featured for the first time on this page. Together for the first time on this page, as we have the Vindicator, who we met in issue number 8 of Spawn, the Vacillator, who is the smallest and presumably weakest of the brothers, as he seems to be the one that they seemingly talk down to the most, and the other 2, I believe that this is the Vandalizer and that this one is the Vaporizer. I kind of always get those 2 confused. I'm sorry if I'm being incorrect in this statement, but Vandalizer being the really muscle-bound one and also seems to be the leader of the group, whereas the Vaporizer is by far the largest of the brothers and also has the multiple spider-like eyes and seems to have almost a spider-like mandible face. But it is a cool shot to see all four of them for the first time, surrounding the Violator in his clown form with, you know, the aesthetics of hell bubbling up around him. This was a cool way to end the first issue of this miniseries. On the next page, we get an explanation that, because obviously there's not really going to be a letter section going on for a miniseries, as there's only going to be a few issues, they decided that they were going to put in somewhat of a behind the scenes look at how this issue was created. And it's really cool. So let's, turn the page and take a look at that. Here on the first page, we see some rough layouts that Alan Moore drew, kind of giving an example of the way that he wanted the pages to look. He then had to send these pages to Bart Sears, which was kind of a hassle given that Alan Moore lives in Europe and Bart Sears lives in America. We also then see how the script is written for the story of each page, kind of explaining where the speech bubbles should be coming from so that all of the speech matches up to the correct Flabiak brother. Also, another thing I'd like to point out that we saw throughout the book, that each one of the brothers has a very unique looking speech bubble, which is really good in terms of helping to keep up with which one of them is talking, especially when they're not all four on page at the same time. But this is a really cool little insight to how page layouts and script writing was being done, roughly 30 years ago at this point. And also, when we turn to the next page, we're going to see some cool stuff about how the penciling and the inking was done. Here we see the finalized versions of the pencils for a few of the pages of the interior of the book. Cool little things, as we can see all these little X's that are around the border. That's to indicate to the inker that these parts of the page were supposed to be solid black. We also, if you can see it on camera here, have places where the speech bubbles are supposed to be for that particular page. One of the things that's probably changed the most in comic book illustration between 30 years ago and today is that back then, after the inking was done, the inker would then take an eraser to erase all of the stray pencil marks and sketch marks that existed on the page before the page could then go on to be, I'm assuming, scanned at that point and then used for printing. However, today, it's not usually done with a physical eraser. At this point, after the image is inked, they usually scan it into a computer and then use Photoshop to eliminate all the stray pencil marks, which in a way is kind of cool because that means all of the artwork that has been inked still has all of those original pencil marks on it as well, which I actually kind of like in terms of preserving the original penciler's artwork. But, at the time, there was really no way around it the way that they were doing comics. Photoshop and digital mediums really have made a lot of big strides in the way comics are produced today, in terms of just making life easier and faster for the artists and the people involved in production. For instance, I know you can do this in Photoshop, and I'm positive you could do it in a lot of other softwares as well. But letterers can actually draw their letters in Photoshop and then create a font using the letters that they hand drew, giving them the ability to go through and actually be able to type through pages of the comic with, their actual lettering, but not having to physically draw it every time they're writing dialogue, which I can't imagine how much that speeds up the process. But those are just a couple of things. There's a lot more, I'm sure, that I don't know about. I'm not an industry insider by any means. Those are just some things that I've read about in the past that have made, a lot of changes throughout the years. We then see some Violator fan art, which I'm certain was fan art that was sent to Todd McFarlane for possible publication within the pages of Spawn. However, since this miniseries was going to come out, and of course he knew about it before anyone else, he probably decided to hold on to them and then print them in this book instead, which seems rather fitting. On the next page, we see several more images, one of Clown and then 5 more of the Violator, all in different poses. This one having a somewhat reminiscent face of Cerebus, alluding to Spawn number 10, where Dave Sim was the author. If you'd like to know more about Spawn number 10, check out my video on Spawn number 10. Or if you'd like to check out any of my Spawn videos, you can check out my Spawn playlist. Then on the next page, we get this advertisement for the Violator medallion, which I need to apologize. This advertisement appeared in Spawn number 14, and I accidentally skipped over it or just completely forgot to record it. That's my fault. Once again, I apologize. However, this medallion needs to be talked about. This is an absurd piece of jewelry that was available in a quantity of 495 of a sterling silver version with garnet eyes, and then a very limited run of 95 that were in 14 karat gold with ruby eyes. Now, I'd like to point out that the price tag on the 14 karat gold version of this ridiculous medallion that I can't imagine anyone would just wear in public went for the price of $595 before shipping and handling and before tax. For a frame of reference, if you adjust for inflation, that's basically $1,300 in today's money as of 2023 when I'm recording this video. $1,300 for this ridiculous piece of jewelry that I can't imagine anyone would be willing to wear in public. I mean, maybe some people, sure. But who do you know that would go around just wearing this absurdity around their neck? And then when you realize how much it costs, I have to question who on earth their target audience was for any of this. Who were they trying to market this to? The people with the amount of money that they would have needed to purchase a 14 karat gold with ruby eyes version of this for the price of just under $600 would most likely have never spent that kind of money on a piece of jewelry as absurd as this. This was when Todd was just kind of starting to get weird with the marketing, man, because I have no idea who on earth they thought was going to be the target demographic for something that cost this amount of money and looked this ridiculous. Even the sterling silver version was $150 at the time. Once again, that's a lot of money to ask literally anyone to spend on a piece of jewelry that looks like this. On the final page of the book, we get an advertisement for the comic book Bloodstrike. If you'd like to know more about Bloodstrike, check out my video on Bloodstrike number 1. This now showing that the monthly series is going to be getting going. Apparently, Chapel will be in the mix. This illustration done by one J. Lee. It looks pretty good. We also see Not Wolverine down here on the bottom being even more Not Wolverine than before. God, I can't believe that they really were doing this, but you know, whatever. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Vanguard number 8, which features Pitt. I do not have a lot of issues of Vanguard. I think I have like issues 1 and then maybe 7 and 10 or something. I'm really trying to get issues of this book so that I can start making videos about Vanguard at some point in the future. But until then, I'm going to have to just wait, seeing as how I really wouldn't be able to do much with only 3 random issues of a comic book. And that was Violator number 1. It's a pretty fun book, in my opinion. It starts off really weird, but then, you know, slowly as the book goes on, it becomes more and more apparent that this is a dark comedy and that it's just completely out of control and over the top in, you know, the best sort of gory, wild, violent way. I do enjoy that they brought Alan Moore back in to write this miniseries, as he was the person who authored Spawn number 8. And I find it intriguing that Todd basically gave Alan Moore the responsibility and, you know, the overall freedom to essentially create a major portion of lore for the Spawn universe in the way that the afterlife and the eighth circle of hell are depicted in the overall narrative for the Spawn series. Alan Moore, of course, being the odds-on most famous person to have worked on this miniseries. However, if you haven't really looked into the work of Bart Sears, I suggest you do. The guy's been in comics for decades at this point, but I mean, he's really a true journeyman of the industry. He's done work for both DC and Marvel, a lot of independent work. He's also done a lot of artwork for action figure packaging. He's taught at the Joe Kubert School of Art, which he is a graduate from. I mean, the guy's got a really impressive resume under his belt. And, I really love what he did in terms of, the creativity and the level of detail and the dynamicism of his artwork in this book. And I'm actually considering going around and seeing if I can find more examples of his stuff. Probably not in Marvel and DC, as I don't really collect a lot of their books to begin with, but maybe some of his other independent work, and trying to see if I can find some of those books, because I'd like to possibly add those to my collection. I'm really impressed with what he's done in this miniseries. But those are just my opinions. Your opinions may vary, but it's okay. We're all entitled to our own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.